Hello everyone, I hope you're having a wonderful day. Today we're diving into an inspiring yet heart-pounding new chapter. After protecting Tieu Lac and their daughter, the CEO joins hands with the villagers to turn a struggling strawberry farm into a thriving business, bringing life back to the entire village. But just as success finally seems within reach, a powerful enemy begins plotting from the shadows. The CEO's own mother is determined to crush his new dream before it can truly grow. Can the CEO protect both his family and the business he built with the villagers? Or will his mother's ruthless plan destroy everything they have worked so hard to achieve? Stay with us until the very end to find out. And if you enjoy emotional family dramas filled with suspense, betrayal, and unforgettable twists, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss our next episode. The days following the confrontation with the gang changed something in the village. Fear had not disappeared. The scar-faced man and his followers had not been caught. Everyone knew they were still somewhere nearby. Yet, life could not stop. The CEO understood one thing better than ever: if fear became stronger than hope, then the people who wanted to destroy them had already won. So the very next morning, he returned to the strawberry fields. The sun had barely risen when dozens of villagers were already working among the rows of strawberries. Some harvested ripe fruit. Some sorted fresh vegetables. Others packed baskets for delivery. The CEO walked through every field carrying his familiar notebook. Only this time, the notebook contained much more than numbers. It contained dreams. Tieu Lac caught up with him carrying 2 bottles of water. "You've barely rested," he smiled. "We're finally moving forward. I don't want to waste a single day." She laughed softly. "You've become more hard-working than every farmer here." The CEO looked across the endless fields. "No, I've become one of them." Those words spread quickly through the village. The former billionaire no longer acted like an outsider. He carried heavy baskets, loaded trucks, worked beneath the hot afternoon sun, shared simple lunches with everyone beneath the banyan tree. The villagers slowly stopped calling him the CEO. Many simply called him our son. One afternoon, the CEO gathered several experienced farmers together. He spread large sheets of paper across an old wooden table. Everyone crowded around curiously. "What are these?" asked one elderly farmer. The CEO smiled. "Our future." On the papers, he had drawn simple production schedules, harvest calendars, transportation routes, packaging plans, storage systems. Everything was easy to understand, no complicated business language, only practical ideas. If Farmer Min harvests on Monday and Farmer Hung harvests on Tuesday, the truck won't have to wait. If we pack everything together, we'll save both time and money. The farmers exchanged surprised looks. No one had ever organized their work this way. For generations, everyone had worked separately. Now, for the first time, the entire village would work as one team. The village chief slowly nodded. This might actually work. Within only 2 weeks, the changes became obvious. Instead of dozens of small deliveries, one large refrigerated truck arrived every morning. Fresh strawberries, vegetables, melons, herbs. Everything was carefully sorted before leaving for the city. When the first truck finally departed, every villager gathered near the entrance road. Children waved excitedly. The elderly smiled proudly. Several women secretly wiped away tears. The CEO stood quietly beside Tieu Lac. Neither of them spoke. They simply watched the truck disappear toward the city. Tieu Lac whispered, "We really did it." The CEO gently shook his head. "No, they did. We simply showed them what they were already capable of." Several days later, good news arrived. The supermarket chain in the nearby city wanted another shipment, then another. Soon, Restaurants began placing orders, hotels joined as well. Demand grew faster than anyone expected. The village suddenly became busier than it had ever been. Every morning, trucks entered carrying empty containers. Every afternoon, they left completely full. The roads that had once been quiet were now alive with activity. For the first time in many years, young people who had left the village started returning home. One young man smiled as he unloaded boxes. "I never thought I'd come back. My parents don't have to farm alone anymore." Another family repaired their abandoned greenhouse. An elderly couple reopened their small vegetable garden. Hope slowly spread from one household to another. Even Tieu Lac's mother couldn't stop smiling. One evening she counted the family's savings before quietly putting them away. "It's not much," she said, "but it feels honest." The CEO nodded. "That's why it means so much." Life remained simple. The family still lived inside the same small wooden house, still shared homemade meals, still slept beneath the old roof that leaked during heavy rain. But every meal now carried something they hadn't felt for a long time: security. Their little daughter had also grown happier. Every afternoon, she ran through the fields laughing while villagers took turns playing with her. She had become everyone's favorite child. Whenever she waved, dozens of smiling faces waved back. Watching everything, the CEO quietly realized something. He had spent years trying to build successful companies, yet he had never seen a business bring this much genuine happiness. This wasn't just profit, it was changing lives. Late one evening, he opened his notebook again. This time, instead of writing numbers, he wrote a single sentence: "Success is measured by how many lives rise with yours." Tieu Lac quietly looked over his shoulder. "You've changed." He smiled. "I think I finally understand what success really means." Meanwhile, hundreds of kilometers away, inside an elegant office overlooking the city, the CEO's mother slowly closed another financial report. Her assistant stood silently beside her. "Madam, the village project is growing much faster than expected." She looked up slowly. "What do you mean?" The assistant handed over several photographs: large trucks, packed strawberries, long lines of farmers, the CEO directing shipments. She frowned. "Who invested?" "No one. They built everything themselves." Her expression became colder. "So, he really intends to start over?" The assistant hesitated. "There is something else. The local news has started reporting on the village. They're calling it the Miracle Strawberry Village." For several seconds, the room became completely silent. Then, the CEO's mother slowly stood. She walked toward the large window overlooking the city skyline. Her reflection stared back at her. For years, she had believed wealth created power, yet somehow, the son who had walked away with nothing was beginning to gain something even more valuable: people, trust, respect. She whispered quietly to herself, "I underestimated you." Behind her, the assistant nervously asked, "What should we do?" A slow smile appeared on her face. Not a warm smile, a calculating one. "If his business succeeds, he'll never come back." She slowly picked up her phone. "There are many ways to destroy a business before it becomes too strong." Far away, inside the peaceful village, the villagers celebrated another successful shipment beneath colorful lanterns. No one realized that somewhere in the city, a new storm had already begun to gather. That evening, the village felt more alive than it had in years. For the first time in a long time, the sound of laughter carried across every small road. Children ran through the fields chasing one another. The elderly gathered beneath the old banyan tree, sharing tea and stories. The younger farmers talked excitedly about expanding next season's harvest. It no longer felt like a struggling village. It felt like a family rebuilding its future together. The CEO sat quietly beside Tieu Lac. Their daughter had fallen asleep in her mother's arms after playing all afternoon. He looked at the tiny smile on his little girl's face. Then he looked across the brightly lit village. "I never imagined," he said softly, "I would find happiness like this." Tieu Lac smiled. "Do you regret leaving everything behind?" He looked at her. "If you had asked me that a year ago, I wouldn't have known the answer. But today," he gently held her hand, "I wouldn't trade this life for anything." Those simple words warmed Tieu Lac's heart. The man beside her was no longer the cold executive she had first met. Life had changed him. Every hardship, every sacrifice, had slowly turned him into someone even stronger. The following week, orders continued increasing. The CEO realized they could no longer depend on a single buyer. "If something happens to one customer," he explained during a village meeting, "everyone here will suffer. So we need more partners." Several villagers nodded. "But how?" asked Farmer Min. The CEO smiled confidently. "We let the product speak for itself." Over the next few days, he personally traveled to neighboring towns. He visited restaurants, local supermarkets, small grocery chains, fresh produce distributors. Unlike before, no one recognized him as a wealthy businessman. They simply saw a hard-working farmer carrying samples of fresh strawberries. Many buyers were surprised by the quality. Others admired the careful packaging. Some immediately signed small contracts. Little by little, new opportunities appeared. Back in the village, everyone worked together. Women carefully packed each box. Young men loaded delivery trucks. Older farmers checked the fruit one final time before shipment. Every person understood. One careless mistake could damage the reputation they had worked so hard to build. One afternoon, the first truck carrying products under their new village brand finally left. A simple logo had been printed on every box. Bin Min Village Fresh. The CEO watched as the truck slowly disappeared down the road. His eyes filled with emotion. It wasn't just a shipment. It was proof that ordinary people could build something extraordinary together. That evening, the village chief approached him. "You've done something no one thought possible." The CEO shook his head. "I only connected people." The old man smiled wisely. "No, you gave them confidence. They already had the strength. They simply forgot." Meanwhile, far away in the city, the CEO's mother had already begun making her move. She sat inside a luxurious conference room. Across from her were several businessmen. One of them placed a folder on the table. "We investigated the village. Their products are becoming popular." Another man added, "If they continue growing, they could become a serious competitor in the regional fresh produce market." She slowly closed the folder. "They won't." Everyone looked toward her. She calmly spoke. "Call every major distributor. Offer them exclusive contracts. If they work with that village, they lose our business." One executive hesitated. "That will cost us a fortune." She looked directly into his eyes. "I didn't ask about the cost. I asked whether it can be done." He lowered his head. "Yes, madam." At that same moment, another phone call was being made, this time not to distributors, but to the scar-faced gang leader. When he answered, the CEO's mother spoke only one sentence: "Don't hurt my son." There was a pause, "But make sure his business never succeeds." The call ended. A slow smile spread across the scar-faced man's face. "So," he muttered, "we don't need violence. We only need fear." Back in the village, the CEO knew nothing about the conversations taking place in the city. His attention remained focused on tomorrow's shipment. Late that night, he sat reviewing orders beneath the small porch light. Numbers filled his notebook: delivery times, customer lists, harvest forecasts. Suddenly, Tieu Lac walked outside carrying a bowl of hot noodles. "You've skipped dinner again." He laughed. "I didn't even notice." She placed the bowl beside him. "If you keep working like this, our daughter will forget what her father looks like." He smiled. "Then tomorrow I'll finish early." She raised an eyebrow. "You've said that every day." Both of them laughed. For a brief moment, everything felt peaceful again. The next morning, excitement filled the village. Today would be their biggest shipment yet. Everyone arrived before sunrise. Boxes were stacked neatly beside the trucks. Farmers moved quickly but carefully. The CEO checked every shipment personally. Everything seemed perfect. Until one truck driver suddenly rushed toward him. "Something's wrong." The CEO immediately stood. "What happened?" "The company that usually transports our goods, they cancelled." His smile disappeared. "What do you mean cancelled?" "They said their contract was terminated overnight." Another driver approached. "So did ours." Within minutes, more bad news arrived. Every transportation company they had booked had withdrawn. No explanation, no warning, no replacement. The farmers looked at one another in confusion. Boxes of fresh strawberries waited beneath the rising sun. Every passing minute reduced their value. If the fruit couldn't leave today, the losses would be devastating. Whispers spread through the crowd. "What do we do?" "We'll lose everything. Our harvest will spoil." Tieu Lac looked anxiously toward the CEO. She could see him thinking, fast, connecting every clue. The timing, the sudden cancellations, the perfect coordination. This wasn't an accident. Someone had carefully planned this. He slowly closed his notebook, then looked toward the anxious villagers. His voice remained calm despite the growing pressure. "No one panic. We'll find another way." The village chief frowned, but every transport company refused. The CEO looked toward the long road leading out of the village. His eyes became determined once again. "If no one is willing to carry our harvest, then we'll deliver it ourselves." The villagers stared at him in disbelief, using tractors, pickup trucks, small family vehicles, even motorcycles with trailers. Could they really replace professional logistics? No one knew, but one thing was certain. The battle had entered a new stage. This time, the enemy was no longer standing at the village gate. They had begun attacking the family's dream itself, and far away in the city. The CEO's mother quietly watched from her office window, believing that this single move would be enough to crush everything her son had worked so hard to build. She had no idea that the greatest strength of the village was never money. It was the people who refused to give up. After successfully protecting his family, the CEO throws all his energy into rebuilding his future alongside Tieu Lac and the villagers. Together, they transform the small strawberry farms into a thriving agricultural business, sending truckloads of fresh produce to the city and bringing new hope to every household. As more orders arrive, the once-forgotten village begins to flourish again. The CEO believes he has finally found the true meaning of success, not wealth, but changing people's lives. However, their growing success catches the attention of the CEO's powerful mother. Determined to stop him from becoming independent, she secretly pressures transportation companies to cancel their contracts, threatening to destroy the village's biggest shipment. With fresh produce waiting to be delivered and time running out, can the CEO save the village's dream and protect the future he and Tieu Lac have worked so hard to build?